Hey Stefan, how are you today?
Doing well, thank you, Zsolt. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Zsolt, I want to thank you for taking the time for all of us and doing this interview with me. Also, because we're introducing something very spectacular today, aren't we?
I think we are. I am so pumped, so excited about the whole thing that we're going to talk about today. That yeah, I think it is going to be an exciting conversation.
Just so that everybody kind of knows where you are coming from. Zsolt, you have a PhD in chemical engineering, you spent 25 years in corporate IT, and you became one of the most downloaded plugins creators in Obsidian. Now, putting all of that together, how does that journey make any sense? And when did visual thinking become the thread running through all of it for you?
Yeah, and when does anything make sense? And to be honest, I was looking at stats in April. 200,000 people downloaded my plugin. Mind blowing. It started as a hobby and it really grew into something unbelievable. But yeah, so I think it's interesting to mention that back at the end of university, I did a PhD in chemical engineering, but actually my research topic was quality management systems in horticulture, a very interesting chemical engineering PhD. And in that, I was actually researching knowledge management systems, information management, document management. And so, in this sense, the PKM part, you could say, is not very far from who I am. And by the way, you can see this box here or cube here. I write about that in Sketch Your Mind. So that's something I did back in high school. I had this idea that I want to spatially represent a story. It's a silly novel as much as can fit on a page because it's six different perspectives on the same events. And so so these things been there in my mind. Um, but yeah, it's just simply the topic that interests me and that's been driving me. Visual thinking has always been in some aspect part of who I am, or maybe the better word is spatial thinking. But yeah, again, not sure if this helps you make sense of it, but that's just the roots are not so different from the present.
What I'm hearing is somebody that is naturally drawn to this. So, did it start out as a creative hobby, or is it something that you build out over time?
So I think for me, the big turning point in terms of bringing in technology and start to think about this as a digital spatial visual um, environment was when at the beginning of 2000s, actually I think it was the year 2000 specifically, I came across this amazing application called the personal brain. And actually they are still on the market and I still use the tool today to some extent, but until 2020 I used it on a pretty much daily basis. The brain is this graph. There you have three different type of roles. You have parents, you have children, and you have friends or jumps. They are the lateral links. And you get this graph view of your notes. The notes are called thoughts, and the graph is called a plex. And so that's your brain. And somehow this enchanted me. I just loved this idea of recording notes, creating connections, and seeing them in space and being able to navigate it in space. And then I came across mind mapping tools, Tony Buzan's different books, and I started to use, I have no real memory. Maybe it was Mind Manager or MindJet or FreeMind, or I've used so many mind mapping tools that I forget which one might have been the first, but I fell in love with mind mapping as well. And all of this because while I'm I love to think in space. In high school, in elementary school, in art class, I was far, far below the average. My motor skills are really not there. You give me pencil and paper, and what comes out is truly awful. And so that has always been a barrier. But with these tools, I was able to create something that is visual. And so that's been driving me all along to connect, to make visual. I do have an imagination or a mental vision of how I want it to look, but if I need to do it with my hand, it never comes out that way.
All right. So if I would give you pen and paper, that would not be something that you can work with. But you've developed so many tools for other people to use. Was there a moment for you where you felt like, hey, this is the turning point? This is where I need to share this with others and not just keep it to myself. I need to put it out there.
Yeah, so the turning point was actually COVID, and it was not so much the inner drive to share, but the realization that I have time on my hand, and and then I started to get involved. Actually, that's when I switched first to Rome research and then to Obsidian because I had some free time to think and look around the PKM market. Is there anything better available? Um, but yeah, so around that time with the Rome community first, I started to create a blog. I started to share some of my ideas. Then TFT Hacker, one of the community members, mentioned that, hey, why not put in a short YouTube video to support my blog post to explain what's there? And I thought, okay, why not? And so I started to create these really YouTube simple tutorials to explain my ideas, and that gradually grew into something that people were interested in, and I was happy to create it, and it felt like something that feels an inner urge to create.
What I'm hearing is, hey, let me share this small thing. And there was some encouragement from inside the community for you to, yeah, do a little more. We want to see more. We want to do more with this. Why don't you? Before you knew it, here we are.
Quite amazing, quite amazing. I think, by the way, probably the driver for this is the Excalidraw plugin. Though I have to say that without the YouTube videos, the plugin would not be this good. And that's because I find that whenever I create a new release, and I think I'm around 450 releases now, so it is quite a number of releases. With every release, I try to create a quick walkthrough of what I did. And when I do the walkthrough, somehow shifts me into a different mindset. And that's when I usually realize that this is not going to work. This is crazy this way. And then usually these walkthroughs can take a day or even 2 days to create, not because it's so hard to create a video, but because that is my process for testing. And then, of course, I release it, and there are still usually some issues, and then people come back and we refine it. But yeah, so that led me to, I guess, create a plugin that is actually valuable to many people. It scratches my own itch. And through this process of talking about it and creating the tool, it created partly a community because in the end, now I have over 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. I have a mailing list with several thousand people. I have a Discord again with lots of people. I have cohorts. So there is definitely a community that gathered around this amazing little tool that in this way together we managed to develop with the community.
Zsolt, sketch your mind. I've been seeing you build this out to something quite unique, and you have built it around 4 pillars where around it you bring people together. I remember there's concept visuals, then there's Excalidraw Mastery, which is already out, Visual Thinking Workshop coming up soon again, and Sketch Your Life in the long run. Why these 4, and what's your thinking behind that structure?
Yeah, so each of these pillars touches on a different aspect of building a system. Maybe I would start with Excalidraw Mastery because that's the easiest to understand. Excalidraw Mastery is about building mastery in the tool. So I've been building this for 4 years now. It has amazing number of features. Just look through the plugin settings and yes, it's instant anxiety if you're a new user because there are just so many settings to go through. But really, it is an amazingly powerful tool. You can do so many things with it. You can automate it, lots of features. And Excalidraw Mastery is about learning the tool. It is really, in that sense, technology centric, building the tool set that you can use for the other stuff. Then I would go to Visual Thinking Workshop as the second pillar, because Visual Thinking Workshop is the workflow. It's the note-taking, personal knowledge management workflow. It provides you with a step-by-step approach of how you can build a visual first note-taking system. What do I mean by visual first? I mean that images are not secondary citizens. They are not things that you drop in as a decoration or an attachment to a document, but visuals are at the center. And you first start with a spatial visual. It could be a sketch of an icon or something, but it can also be a diagram, or it can just be virtual post-it notes on a whiteboard scattered around. But you start with this visual aspect, and then once it starts to crystallize, that's when you go and write the text. And I personally believe that writing is thinking. So I'm a big believer in words, in articulating yourself, in forming sentences. But I also believe that our natural abilities are spatial and visual. I like to say this, but our ancestors, and I'm thinking millions and millions of years back, they did not survive by reading bullet point lists. I tell you for sure. They survive by being able to navigate, by spotting prey and predators, and by having this spatial awareness. And I think if you build on that, you create a system that harnesses that superpower. So that's the visual thinking workshop, which in practice goes through the process of reading a book. So it's a 7-week course, cohort-based course. You read a book, and by the end of the 7 weeks, you have a book on a page summary. You have visual Lego blocks of ideas that you're taking away from the book, and you're starting to build a visual Zettelkasten system. Then the third pillar, I would go to the concept visuals or communicating with illustrations, making meaningful illustrations. I find that during the visual thinking workshop, we have a session that's dedicated to creating concept visuals for concepts from the book. And this is something that usually the most interactive session of them all. And people usually come away with this surprise understanding of, first of all, you start out with a quote and no idea how you're going to visualize it. And in the end, you end up with 10 different awesome illustrations for the same idea. And so this process of coming up with illustrations that don't just put a pretty picture there, but have a story to tell. And So that's one surprise that you can actually, there's a process and you can come to that point. But the other surprise is that how many different visual interpretations you can give to the same thought. And so I think translating abstract ideas into visuals is a very important step in making the abstract concrete, in translating the intangible into something tangible, and that way helping it make stick in your mind, and it helps you create connections. And then the fourth pillar, I think the whole purpose. So if I would ask you, Stefan, why are you taking notes? What would be your answer?
To make sense of things.
Yeah. And why do you want to make sense of things?
Because I would like to understand what I'm interacting with and as I make sense, bring it back to other people. Like, hey, I think it's like this, or I think it's like that.
Yeah. So I think we want to make sense of things, and of course we want to take action. So the whole purpose of taking notes is not this self-fulfilling thing that you take notes and then you're happy you have notes because so what? You're taking notes because you want to build understanding, you want to reach new insights, you want to make good decisions. And so Sketch Your Life is this framework where I plan to look at one visual framework, mental model, storytelling approach, one decision making tactic each month, and sort of month by month build up this tool belt of thinking tools. And so, in this sense, Sketch Your Life is about the underlying purpose of all of these other tools. So, Mastery, Excalidraw Mastery gives you the hammer. The workshop gives you a process for how to hammer in the nails. I guess I don't have a good picture for what the concept visuals do, but the Sketch Your Life is about what are you going to do after you hit the nails. So what? It's going to help you actually drive decisions, get results, move forward in your thinking. And so in that sense, Sketch Your Life builds on all of these three and takes it to a whole new level that you can apply at work or in your private life.
If I would add, I think concept visuals is about having a blueprint and then following it. And then Sketch Your Life is more generative. It comes up. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Sketch Your Life has an aspect of generative thinking. It is, I mean, in the end, isn't that the purpose of thinking in the first place? So if you're just rethinking what someone else has already thought, I mean, it can be a nice exercise, but what's the purpose? I think the ultimate purpose of note taking is that you want to generate something new. You want to you want to leave a footprint or fingerprint in the road. You want to make a difference. And I think Sketch Your Life focuses on the tools that help you achieve that.
I hear you. So, Zsolt, as you said earlier, you had a plugin, and then you had a blog, and then you decided to do some YouTube videos. And I know that there's a Discord, there's a wiki, there's a website, there's a book, there's a course, there's other ideas. Why a community now? What does the community offer that neither of these things can?
I think the community offers simplicity. So frankly, I'm starting to lose track of what you mentioned. All these channels, I'm pretty sure I have more than 10 channels, multiple domain names and multiple products and stuff. It's all over the place because each time I pick something up, I started something new because, and I always had my reasons why. I think the time has now come to consolidate all of this into one place. And that's what I'm doing with Sketch Your Mind community. I am actually going to be stopping the other channels, of course, not YouTube. So YouTube will continue to live. But other than that, the other sub-communities and activities, I'm bringing all into one place. And the reason is to create something that's much more easy to understand. I mean, I can really empathize with my followers, my community. It's super hard to understand what I'm offering, where you can find it, and how it all fits together. I think it's an amazingly confusing picture. And I want to be able to communicate a single coherent, simple picture, a single simple package that you can join. And yeah, so I think that's the core reason. And indeed, I am going to be, to use a negative word, killing off all the other channels and bringing them into one place.
Zsolt, can you tell me something? Who's the person you most want to reach with Sketch Your Mind? Can you paint me a picture of them? Who are they? What's their life like right now?
Yeah, so I have 5 different personas in mind. And I think number one, I have the researcher in mind. So these are the people who deal with different research projects, who need to resurface information, people who read lots of PDF documents and they have all these clipping and stuff and they want to bring it together into one place, something that helps them make sense of it all. And I think the tools I have in Excalidraw with, for example, the PDF++ plugin, with my idea integration board, with the visual Zettelkasten and workflow, I think I have an amazing lot to offer them. And by the way, I myself do research as well in terms of my professional job, understanding standards and directions where the world is going. And I read lots of PDFs and I actually use this workflow. So for me, they are one of these groups that I want to target. I think the other group that will benefit from this, the other persona, is the persona who likes to take handwritten notes. The person who really likes that activity of drawing, taking notes, the craftsmanship of creating notes. So it's not just quickly getting the words out of your hand, touch typing, or nowadays dictating to whatever tool you're using, WhisperNet or whomever, and getting the notes out. No, for them, they're looking for something tangible, something beautiful. Maybe it's only beautiful to them, but it is beautiful, something that involves craftsmanship. And I think, again, I'm that sort of person. I like to create stuff that I feel is looks nice. It has that extra touch. It's not just words written down, but it overall feels good. And so I think they are the second persona in my mind. And things like a frictionless daily visual note-taking workflow is something that comes to mind when you open your Obsidian PKM system, and instead of looking at a black Markdown document, you look at a canvas and you can use your Apple Pencil or whatever else, and you can just take notes that way and connect your ideas that way. They are definitely the second group of people that I have in my mind. And then I think the third group, and you will find that I'm each of the 5. So in that sense, I'm looking for people who are in some way similar or touch on similar things because I think I have a solution to offer them. The third group are the ones who want to make sense of the world. And especially today, the world is super noisy. We just get all of these impulses, all of this noise coming our way, and they are looking for a way to somehow have this infinite whiteboard where you can just throw things up there and then you can start to shuffle them around and somehow find clusters of understanding. So these are the people who you could say are visual organizers who want to collect stuff and then use somehow a spatial visual approach to clarify their understanding, to crystallize their next action, to come to decisions, etc. So I think, again, I have a lot to offer to that group. That's how I plan pretty much everything. If I go to speak at a conference or do a presentation at work, whatever, immediately the day I learn I'm going to do that, I start to throw my ideas on a whiteboard, and I do that for a couple of weeks. And then I have a messy whiteboard and I start to shuffle stuff around until a picture emerges. So um, they are the third group of people that would come to mind. And then I think there are those people who like to tinker with their PKM. So you have the geeks, the PKM nerds, who have their fine-tuned system with automations and everything just works beautifully. Yeah, they are definitely like me with my scripts and with all my automations. And I think, again, in terms of Excalidraw mastery, especially, I'm pretty sure that there's lots to offer them in the community, and they're definitely a group of people. Last year, I experimented with something I called Techno Visual PKM. It alone didn't quite work, so that you could say was an unsuccessful experiment, but there was definitely interest for that. There were the people who actually wanted this mash of technology and PKM in one go. And already in the Sketch Your Mind community with some of the founding members, there are discussions ongoing about how can you bring in AI into your visual workflow. So I think those are the people who are typically these thinkers. And then the final persona that I have in mind is the storyteller, the person who wants to create presentations that people remember, that who do not want to create a bullet point hell in terms of a presentation, and also don't want just to put pictures there to make the hell look pretty, but they want to convey a message with their visuals. They want to look elegant. They want to be able to tell a story that captures people's imagination, that's visual, that's interconnected. So I think those visual presenters, be it for a YouTube channel, be it for work presentations, be it for whatever else other reason they might have for telling stories, I actually think that thinking is storytelling. So when you understand something, that's the point when you're able to tell yourself a story. So in that sense, actually, that storytelling is also for yourself. If you're able to express a story visually, you're going to have it internalized. Until you can do that, I doubt you really have an understanding. In summary, I have these five personas in mind. I'm thinking of the researcher. I'm thinking of the person who likes to create beautiful stuff, the craftsmen who want to build a visual daily note-taking habit, for example. I have the visual organizers who want to create meaning out of chaos. I have the storytellers who want to create awesome visual presentations, and finally the thinkers who love their tool, love their workflows, and want to enhance that.
Don't we recognize all of them ourselves as well, right?
Indeed, to some extent, we are all of them, and at times we are one or the other for some time.
I hear you. I hear you. All right. Now, person comes into Sketch Your Mind community and has been around there for half a year. What's the transformation you're hoping for them to experience? What does the person do differently or feel differently after that time?
Yeah, so I think it is about accountability and habits, if I would be very simple and blunt. If I want to be a bit more theoretical, then I think in this age of artificial intelligence and in the field of personal knowledge management, which can really feel lonely because you're in conversation with yourself, I actually believe in what you could call HCI, human community intelligence. I believe that one of our superpowers as humans is the ability to connect with others and to create space for us to grow and achieve together. And so I think one thing that I expect people will experience is riding the wave, coming in and being able to build a habit of spatial thinking, visual note taking, of using the tool through the joint momentum of the community. And so that's my expectation that after half year in the community, people will be taking visual notes. It will become much more of a second nature that if I take notes, it's a visual note. It's not going to be I go to a text document because that's what I've always done and that comes natural, but you'll develop this this habit of picking first a whiteboard and creating a note. And I bet you that that's going to transform people's thinking in a fundamental way.
Now, to come back a little bit to what you mentioned earlier, and what I've learned and heard from you, not everybody is natural at visual thinking. Yeah, we've confirmed this, we acknowledge this. And a lot of people will probably say, like, but I cannot draw. I'm not a visual person. You don't want to see my drawings for sure. What would you say to them?
I would say to them a couple of things. First of all, I'm also not skilled at drawing, as we talked about, and I built prosthetics for myself to help me bridge that gap. I heavily argue that we are not, if someone says they are not a visual thinker, I think you need to separate nature from nurture. Because essentially, and I already mentioned this, so I don't want to dwell on this too much. If you look back history, thinking millions of years, we have innate visual capabilities. We have innate social capabilities. We are social animals. We have language capabilities. Those have been all around for definitely a long period of time. Writing is super recent. So it's a couple of thousands of years. That is, evolutionary speaking, nothing. And indeed, while we have a visual center and roughly 30% of your brain is visual processor, we don't have a reading and writing center. We are repurposing our brain. It's like you're using your CPU to run a graphics heavy game or a video editor that requires a GPU. You don't really have the tool. And for this reason, in school, we spend enormous amount of time learning to read and write. Just think back and put it on balance. How much time did you learn to take visual notes, to create, apart from art class, to organize ideas in space, spatial visual thinking, and how much time did you spend reading and writing? And you did that because reading and writing is super hard. Why is it hard? Because it's not your natural skill. It doesn't come natural. But we've been trained to it for 12 years, or if you went to university, maybe 16, 20 years, depending on PhD, etc. I think I spent almost 20 years in school. Amazing. Um, you were building this skill set. So no wonder when you try to pick up visual thinking, it feels something like you say, hey, that doesn't come natural. I think it comes natural, but you've been nurtured out of it. And I think just the final thought on this, if you think back when you were a kid, what did you do first? Did you write or did you pick up a crayon or a colored pencil and scribble and draw? Of course, you drew. And so I think visual thinking is about waking up your inner child. And that, of course, that inner child will bring that inner curiosity, playfulness, and I think joyfulness of being a child. And I think all of that for me is bundled into this visual thinking, become this very serious document creators. And I think there's another way, and I think it's all in us. It's just resurfacing the child, giving it a bit of space to grow. And I think if you think about it, how many years net time you spent learning to read and write, if you just invest a small portion of that into learning to think visually, you're going to achieve amazing results, I bet you.
That sounds like a beautiful promise. Over the last few weeks, we've spoken about sketch your mind, and you mentioned at a certain point, sketch your mind as a practice, not just as a skill. What is for you the difference, and why does that distinction matter?
I think habits matter. Habits are, you become what you do, I think is the fundamental truth. And James Clear has this, or at least I have this image, but I think he has this quote as well, that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. And so I visualize this as people lining up and placing their ballots uh, at an election, that I think you become what you do every day. And for that reason, I think to become a visual thinker, you need to practice it every day. That's when you're going to start to create visual connections. And I think you don't want to become a visual thinker because visual thinking is cool or whatever. I think you want to become a visual thinker because of what we just talked about, because that helps you awaken your inner child, your inner creativity, your inner joy, your openness to receive the world. And I think those are things, at least those are things I want for sure. And so making it a habit means that it's not something that I pick up when I need to create a presentation and I need to come up with a nice visual for it, but it's something that I do every day. Every piece of information I come across, I link to my icon library. I document on a mind map. I create visual daily notes. And through this, it just really becomes second nature. And that's I think what you want to achieve, that it feels natural and feels comfortable because you have that consistency of practice.
Today, we're living in a time where AI is growing. You mentioned it earlier. More and more of your members are already experimenting with AI. We've seen that, we've heard that. Whether that was Claude for visual ideas, Notebook LM for research, you use Notebook LM as well, and even AI assisted coding. Now, what's your take on integrating AI into visual thinking practice? Are there any lines being between speeding up your thinking and outsourcing it?
It's a very, very difficult question, and I think many of us struggle with that. I would even bet to say everyone struggles with this. I have two thoughts here. So, thought number one, I think we often confuse the product with the journey. And I think, yes, Notebook LM can create a sketchnote summary of a book. If you have the EPUB of the book or the PDF, then in 10 minutes, you have a pretty decent sketchnote summary of the book. You can even prompt it to be a little bit like this or a little bit like that, and it looks good. Its content is good. The question is, do you have the understanding? And I think it becomes, of course, a different process. And since I'm using Notebook LM, I find that my reading process is changing, but I'm not always sure that it's changing in the right direction. Because instead of going through something in sequence and taking the time to understand the logical sequence of the author, I jump around and I pick from here, I pick from there, and I think in the end, there's an article we read in the visual thinking workshop. It's how to read a paragraph, and the concept there, or one of the observations there, is before you criticize the author or the ideas, you need to be first able to speak in the voice of the author. Until you're able to speak the voice of the author, you actually don't know what the author is saying. And until you don't know what the author is saying, you cannot really have a perspective. So I think that's one aspect of what I think, that we confuse the product with the journey. And I personally enjoy creating visuals. So for me, it's like when you're watching a series or reading a book that you enjoy, you don't want it to end. You actually enjoy the process. So for me, that's where visual thinking and my workflows really shine. I'm not in it for completing it quickly. I'm in it because I enjoy the actual process. And then I think the other use case that comes to mind, and I use this super frequently, uh, even while creating the community, I use this approach, but I used it when I was writing my book. I use it when I create illustrations. AI is an amazing impersonator. So if there's a source of knowledge, maybe a YouTube channel, maybe a presentation, a book that actually embodies what you want to do, you can ask AI to impersonate the author and to coach you. So, for example, I have an illustration coach that I trained on certain materials that I thought were advices from good illustrators and workflows from good illustrators. And I'm doing the process, but when I create something, I share it with my AI agent, and the AI agent impersonates the people that I asked it to impersonate and gives me feedback. And yes, it's not the real feedback of the people, but it creates this loop, and I find that I end up with much better illustrations. And then, of course, once I'm ready, I go with those to my wife, and we have several more iterations. But getting the first round of iterations and using AI as a coach to learn new skills, I think in visual thinking, you can use AI. It can do pretty good job in analyzing the illustration you created, giving you feedback in how to make it better. I see that as a super valuable use case when you're actually not outsourcing your agency, but you're building skills with the support of a coach that maybe otherwise would not be accessible to you.
I absolutely hear you. Use AI without losing yourself. Of everything that you've been teaching so far, or maybe even particularly in the visual thinking workshop and through your content, what is one thing that consistently surprises most people that they were like, I did not expect to get this?
If you would ask people what they consistently talk about are the two-sided notes, the postcard approach. I think that's a big aha moment for many. The basic idea is when I say postcard approach is on the front, you have your illustration. That's the visual summary of whatever you're thinking about. And on the back, like on a postcard, you have metadata like the address, etc. So you can add metadata like dates and links and whatever. And you have the message because William Sorian has this quote that a picture speaks 1,000 words. Yes, but only if you speak or think those 1,000 words. So for me, yes, on the front, I have the image, and that's a great visual summary. On the back, I still want to express the ideas that it triggers in my head and put it to words. And I want to add metadata so I can find it, I can connect it, I know who to attribute, where it came from, where it leads, etc. Link it into my Zettelkasten. So I think this thinking surprises many people. Actually, it surprised me as well. Because at first, the fact that Excalidraw drawings are markdown documents was more of a technical hack. Because this way, Obsidian automatically updates links. And so I thought that's great. I don't need to build that feature. And then as I started to use it, I realized that it takes off so much cognitive load. I don't need to think about this image is linked. No, the image and the document is the same thing. I flip it over and I have a shortcut for it. And I regularly flip my documents back and forth. I even have ways to put the front on the back and the back on the front, so I can look at the two sides at the same time. Yeah, I think that's the other bit that definitely comes across as feedback from people that was a big aha moment.
Zsolt, you could have kept running workshops. You could have stayed on YouTube. You could have had all your channels. But you decided to build a community around this. What is happening in the community that could not happen otherwise?
I think learning happens in a community. I now have roughly 60 founding members who joined in the first week or so. And I've been having one-on-one conversation with many of them. And what I'm finding is each of these people are deep thinkers with amazing experience, lots of motivation, and it's just a super positive environment. And I think these are the people you want to learn from. I'm not quite sure who to attribute the idea to, but I've read it in multiple books that you're the average of the 5 people that you're surrounded with. I think that's a fundamental truth. And I believe that the community is that place where you're surrounded by people who are deep thinkers, who are fundamentally good people who want to achieve something positive. And I think put that together, that's definitely something more than just producing videos or writing books. Also, Creating the course is a different thing. The course is great because there's a temporary community, but it's temporary. And I think relationships develop over time. It requires time to deepen, to really bring value. So, but writing a book is pretty lonely. Creating YouTube videos is pretty lonely. Creating plugins and writing code is pretty lonely. You're not really interacting human to human. You don't have a conversation there. And I really believe in what I said earlier, the HCI, the human community intelligence instead of AI. I think AI at the moment is taking us down on a super individualistic and lonely path because everyone can produce anything in moments. You don't need others. You can do it yourself with tools, and you're just sitting in front of a screen or maybe chatting to a phone instead of chatting to someone else. I think it's not natural. And so that's why a community, I believe in this changing world, communities are going to be even more important than before. And I believe for myself, if I want to be selfish, for myself to grow and to prosper, I need people whose average I would love to be, right? So that's the bottom line, that you need to look for the type of people whose average you would want to become. And that way you can become a better person. So that's for me the objective with the community.
That is fantastic. It carries a lot of hope.
I have a lot of hope for the community. I really believe that this can be something awesome.
Well, what I've seen, it certainly is. Imagine that the community, you're looking in, you're like, this is happening. This is the best how they could actually look like. And I'm not talking about the platform and how it looks, but what the people are doing. What are they experiencing together? What are you experiencing with them?
So we're experiencing energy. We're experiencing support for one another. We're experiencing a safe space to share. Earlier I mentioned that how YouTube and creating walkthroughs of my plugin after each release has greatly improved the quality of the output. I think the same is true for everything else. So in the community, my vision is people are comfortable sharing their half-baked early solutions, showcase it, and get feedback from the others, get support. I think the community at its best is like this, that we have engagement, we have open sharing, we have support, and we have a safe space to discuss whatever we want.
Let me ask this question differently. Now, you mentioned earlier that if you're working on Excalidraw, do some coding, it can be a bit lonely. AI can be a bit lonely and become quite individual. Visual thinking, while we're doing it, it can also be a bit solitary. Whether it's in your notebook, in your Obsidian vault, or in your own head, or wherever you are doing it. What does it feel like then to practice together with other people?
Yeah, so one of my hopes is that we get to practice Dave Gray's game storming games together. By the way, Dave is one of the founding members, so he's around in the community. Maybe we can get him to help us practice some of his games. Because I think those games, at least the ones I've had experience with and tried, those are really collaborative, simple community visual activities that help you think better. So I think there is an opportunity for visual thinking not to be lonely in that sense. So to bring it together, again, back to what I've mentioned already a couple of times in the workshop when we create a concept visual or when we create the storyline for our final presentation or the other exercises as well. The beauty of those exercises is that they are collaborative. Everyone brings their own input and we together create something that individually we couldn't have created. That's always my finding that I come in with an idea. One of the first exercises is we create a concept map for the book or the key concept in the book. And everyone needs to prepare. But then as we put it together, usually a much better, much cleaner, much simpler map emerges. And I love that process. I love this collaborative, creative process. Um, and I think the community definitely has all the ingredients to make it happen. We need to make sure that as we cook it, it's going to taste good. But if we look at the ingredients, for sure, we have the right ingredients in the kitchen.
I can't ready to get started. What are we making first? So we spoke about what could happen in half a year, but let's go a little bit further right now. 5 years from now, Sketch Your Mind becomes what you hope it to become. Can you walk us through? Can you sketch for us what that would look like? What would you look back on and be like, wow, I feel so proud for achieving this together with the community?
So I think visual PKM becomes mainstream. Like right now, all of the note-taking tools are text-based, and most of the PKM workflows that you read about are text-based, and the key thought leaders are text-heavy thought leaders in the space. I think the vision is that Sketch Your Mind becomes the engine that transformed this PKM world into a space PKM as the norm. But that's where I would go. That indeed we have a movement, and with that comes different tools. Because frankly, of course, I like Excalidraw. It works and does what I need. I'm a solo developer, and yes, I'm using Obsidian, which is a great product with a small team developing it. And I use Excalidraw, which is a great product, a few people developing it. And I'm the glue in between to create a visual PKM tool. This is light years away from a professional production. And imagine that you have the movement, the market for professional companies to jump on this and create visual PKM tools, real useful graph views, and all of these tools that transform our thinking. I think that's the dream, that we create that environment that feeds a market that will then produce the tools that we will love in the future.
That sounds like a wonderful dream. Might I even dare a fantastic North Star to go towards together with the community?
I think, of course, on a personal level, what I'm looking for is maintaining and building a visual thinking habit, and along the way, refining my not so great artistic skills and fueling that inner child and creativity. So if I look at this on a personal level, then my vision for the 5 year future is that we have a group of highly creative, joyful people who just create together, who enjoy being
For someone who's been watching your videos for a long time or reading your book or are just curious but a little bit hesitant, what would you want to say to them directly?
The door is open. I'm happy to have you come over and check out community Sketch Your Mind. And there's no commitment or no stake in trying it. Actually, there are some free components that you can sign up to and learn from. I created an Excalidraw Essentials course, for example, which I think covers some pretty important basic features that I bet you half of them you don't know about, and you'll be glad you learned. There's nothing to lose. So that would be what I say. The door is open. I invite you to come in. Of course, if you decide to come in and join and become a member, I think now is the best time, because if you do it before 31st of May, then you can lock in for life a half price compared to what I'm going to be offering the membership for in the future. Also, if you decide now to come and join cohort 16 of the visual thinking workshop, you're actually reading an amazing book. It's by Jefferson Fisher, The Next Conversation. And one of the quotes from Fisher that caught my attention was that the next word you're going to say can change your life. And so words have real power. How you say them, what you say, when you say them, everything makes a difference. And this is what the book is about. This is an amazing opportunity to join the visual thinking workshop. And because I'm starting up the community, you also get an amazing offer around it. So I think there is really, really nothing to lose. There's everything to gain. You can gain visual thinking friends. You can gain a community of like-minded thinkers, or you can just gain a free course on Excalidraw. I think it's all a gain. There's nothing to lose. So yeah, the door is open.
How about the people that are your YouTube audience? They're already on your Discord. Why would they move to Sketch Your Mind? What's different or better about what you're building now in this space?
So I've always had an issue with YouTube, and that's the one-way communication. Yes, we have the chat or discussion under the video, but that is not really very personal or deep. So my vision is that the community is going to be the space where we can go deeper in the topics that I put on YouTube. In fact, what I've been thinking is there are already some very interesting questions and topics coming up in the community around creating visual icon library, a friction-free daily visual note-taking practice, working with PDFs and using a spatial visual model to understand these documents, working with AI and Excalidraw. I think these are going to be amazing YouTube content. But then I think the community is going to be where we can go deeper. So a YouTube video might be 15, 20 minutes, and it's a one-way conversation. In the community, we can have Q&A on the video. We can have further follow-ups. We can have sharing of how it's implemented and who implements it how. So I think that is where it becomes much more than YouTube. In terms of the Discord community, over time, I'm going to close those. So as mentioned, I already have too many communities. So my objective is to bring everything into one place, and that's going to be the Sketch Your Mind community.
I've noticed in between the questions and what you're saying, it almost feels like there's something personal for you building this community. So, my question for you is, what is that something you're putting out into the world that matters to you beyond the content or the platform?
So the reason I smiled was a Stephen Covey slogan came to mind, and it was the live, love, learn, leave a legacy as the as I think a good motto for life. Um, I think I enjoy sharing. I enjoy helping others. And of course, I enjoy visual thinking and tinkering. We talked about the five personas. Those are the five things I enjoy doing, amongst others. And yeah, I mean, the inner drive is simply create an environment where this can happen. And I find that it's very hard to find these people in the world if you just look around yourself. It's hard to spot them, but I think the beauty of the internet, the beauty of our connected world is they can come together from all the continents and all the locations, and it becomes one community. I did, I think last year I did a account, and frankly, I don't exactly remember the number of countries, but it was roughly 40, between 40 and 50 different countries from which I had participants in the visual thinking workshop over the past years. Mind blowing and fantastic. All the different perspectives, all the different lives and backgrounds that people bring together. Yeah, that's the inner drive to get that connection to create that community.
You've mentioned throughout this interview that you're doing it for yourself and for others. You've mentioned these different personas and people that enter different moments in their journeys. How do you recognize that for yourself?
Hmm. So it takes me back to 2017. In 2017, I was moving home from the Netherlands and I was switching companies as well. And in that process, as I was preparing for this, I did a couple of online tests and just finding myself. And one of the tests I did was the Gallup Strength Finder. Essentially, the idea is that if you focus on your weaknesses, then, and we always focus on everyone's weaknesses and we develop the weaknesses, then we get this average mediocre across the board because everyone we try to pull up to the average level on their weaknesses and then you get this average nothing. Instead, a different approach is to recognize your strength and double down on the strength and become the person that you naturally are. And in that, I had a couple of strengths that were, yeah, it's in a way you could say it's an eye opener. When you look in the mirror and you see how you look, that's an eye opener, especially if you didn't have a mirror before. But even though you have an idea of how you look, you still look in the mirror and you get a confirmation, and that helps, that grounds you. And so some of these strengths were, one was focused around input, which is I'm very, I find joy, I find fulfillment, but I also am good at taking in information, in learning, in acquiring something new. The other strength was focus. I'm able to stay focused on delivering something for an extended period of time. I will not switch quickly from thing to thing. Of course, within the path, things can change, but I have the ability, or actually, it's not so much the ability, but I find energy in driving something on the long haul. And and I don't know what the word for that was, but it was the sharing of expertise. And so one of the recommendations from the Strength Finder was indeed to look for ways to share my knowledge. And so that sort of laid in the background because I found a new job. I started working, etc. And then came COVID, and that's when I had time. I remembered what I learned from that assessment, and I thought, okay, why not? So if you ask in terms of a personal journey, it's simply the acceptance and realization of having looked in the mirror, having seen what's there, and I actually buy into this idea that we should build on what we already naturally are good at or our innate capabilities instead of forcing something that we are not, because one leads to a mediocre average, the other leads to exceptional performance.
One quick question. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice at the beginning of this whole journey, what would it be?
Create Sketch Your Mind community from the beginning. It creates so much hassle, but yeah, I mean, probably if I go back even further, start jump on this track much earlier. Start to contribute to some online community and see where that takes you. Instead of being a lurker, become a contributor because it's a much more rich experience. It's easy to be a lurker, and of course, for many, many years, I lurked around on different communities and was happy to read and consume, but maybe didn't feel that I have something to add or didn't think that what I would add is good enough or just didn't have the time. There's always excuses that I came up with for myself. Yeah, probably I would advise to just simply go and do it. Stop thinking about it, just do it. There's nothing to lose. And really, I think that's the beauty of all of this. There's everything to gain and nothing to lose.
The next best moment to do this is now. Zsolt, thank you so much for taking the time for us. And we are so looking forward to what you're going to be building inside the community for Sketch Your Mind. I hope to see you inside. And if not, then until next time.
Yeah, Stefan, thank you. It was a joy. And yes, let's meet inside.